We really love armor, don't we? Well, noble ones, today I would like to talk about how to distinguish, first of all, properly made armor from costume armor, from fantasy armor, and then we will discuss some suggestions I'd like to give you on how to start doing historical reenactment, whether it be Roman reenactment, whether it be early medieval, whether it be late 15th century. So let's get to it. I think we can start by saying that you can diversify three kinds of armor. No matter what armor we are talking about, and no matter what century we are talking about, armor can be either the real deal, like properly made, historically accurate, functional armor. It could be fantasy, and it could be costume armor. Now, let's say that a friend of yours comes to your place and asks you, "Hello, Elizabeth. Hello, John. You like armor, don't you? You watch all these historical YouTubers. Look at this breastplate here from a game I'm enjoying. Is this historically accurate? Is this legit?" And then you think about it, like, I don't know. I mean, maybe it looks kind of okay. No, it doesn't. But how can you recognize this? Well, let me tell you, I'm going to give you now one very simple advice, a piece of advice that you can use. You don't need to visit hundreds of museums. You don't need to spend thousands of hours looking at artistic representations of actual medieval cuirasses to actually learn how to immediately tell if a breastplate is made properly or not. And it's something that is going to literally change completely the way you look at a breastplate ever again. So, the most important thing when we're talking about late 14th century, late 15th century breastplates is that, first off, it needs to be tailored to your body, and I did say this in yesterday's video where I talked about mail, link in the description below, but it needs to be tailored to your body, but the actual breastplate should not go all the way down to the belt. It should stop round about, roughly speaking, the height of your navel. The reason for this is that, and as you can see, this one here doesn't. Just like most, I would say many breastplates in video games, but also many breastplates in actual cheap costume replicas of armor that you can get in these sites, do. The reason for this is that it doesn't work, because in a game, although it's supposed to be metal, it bends with the body through the animations, but real metal doesn't, differently from mail armor. In fact, mail can reach even mid-thigh, sometimes even further down to your knees, because mail takes the shape of your body, but plate doesn't. So the way plate works is that if it goes all the way to your navel, okay, and then you can have a separate piece, like to protect the lower abdomen, like the placard, for example, in Italian armor, which then with time, like 15th century, will go all the way up to provide double layer protection in the very core and center of your cuirass, and your torso. But apart from this and the way they actually fill the gap, doesn't really matter now. If it goes all the way down to the belt, you can't bend, and this is terrible. Well, first off, let's say that you drop something and you need to lean forward to take it. Well, what you're doing is that you are bending, aren't you? But if the plate reaches your belt, what's going to happen is that you're going to apply pressure to the plate, the whole cuirass is going to be raised up, and it's going to choke you. So it doesn't work, and it could be very dangerous, because if you are fighting with it and you're grappling with someone and he smashes you on the floor, and it sort of forces you to do this movement, it could hurt you really badly if this plate or gorget or whatever you're wearing is immediately teleported into your neck, thrusted into your neck. So you don't want armor to hurt you. Armor is supposed to protect you, and this is why properly tailored armor should reach this height. This is immediately something that you can notice and you can on the spot and say, this is properly made, or this was designed by someone who doesn't really understand how real armor functions. On the same note, most breastplates, particularly in European armor, have more of a, how can I call it, the shape of a dome, a little bit, rather than being completely flat. And the reason for that is that a dome surface is going to deflect attacks, coming attacks more easily, and sort of disperse some of the impact force, whereas a flat surface wouldn't. Okay, this is all impressive. Now we know how to recognize good plate armor, and we have also learned that plate armor should be fully tailored to your body, but that's going to cost a lot of money, isn't it? And that is one of the reasons why, if you want to go into historical reenactment, I would suggest you, unless you have a whole bucket of money to use in it and to use for it, then I would strongly suggest you to not start from late 14th century and late 15th century armor, but to actually begin with, 11th century or 12th century suit of armor, if you want to go for a knight, if you want to reenact a knight, because in that case it will be mainly mail armor with perhaps a actual helmet made of plate. Mail is cheaper, and as I said, it's more forgiving than plate, meaning that yes, it should be tailored to your body if possible, but if you don't get it perfectly tailored to your body, but you get sort of approximate measures, it's still going to work because of the fact that, as I said yesterday, you can put a tight belt on it, and then you can just rise it up a little bit and let it, it helps with weight distribution. Part of the weight will be shared on your hips, and which is what happens with plate when it's properly made. But as we said now, as I can appreciate, plate doesn't actually work if it's not properly tailored, whereas mail does. And although if you are uncertain on the actual size, I would go for a little bit bigger than a little bit smaller, because if it's too tight, you might not be able to wear padding underneath. And mail without padding, it's just half protection, meaning that yes, it's going to protect you from cuts, yes, it's going to protect you from penetration, but it's not going to protect you from blunt trauma. That is the responsibility of padding underneath the aketon. For more details on the sort of rings and the sort of inner diameter and everything that I suggest, check out yesterday's video, link in the description below. Okay, so we have established this, and for the helmet I would still go for an armourer, someone who with 400 euros, perhaps he can make a good great helm for you. And please keep in mind that yes, sometimes great helms were worn over other helms, smaller helmets called servalier, sometimes even over a bassinet. But we also have the historical possibility, depending on the century we are reenacting, to actually wear a smaller version of a great helm, which just goes on top of either padding or a mail coif, which still needs to have padding underneath, as we can appreciate in actual medieval iconography, which in fact shows people, soldiers and knights wearing mail coifs, having these sort of bigger heads because of the padding underneath. If you wear a mail coif without padding, it's not going to work. So what about a surcoat? Well, a surcoat is something that will appear on top of cuirasses and suits of armor of knights all the way to the 14th century. But with the beginning of the 15th century, the new fashion of the era was the so-called bianca armatura, or white armor, particularly in Italy, but also in the Gothic style, which has the armor, having nothing on top of it, differently from previous eras. Because even during the Crusades, we know that knight crusaders were wearing surcoats and tunics mantles on top of their mail armor to protect it from the weather, etc. But that was not the fashion anymore with 15th century, particularly late 15th century suits of armor after 1420 in the development of the full suit of armor, so the full harness. So I would rather refrain from surcoats if you are going into full 15th century, providing you have the money to do that. Okay, now, but you're not only interested in medieval reenactment, you also like Roman reenactment. Which one should you choose? Well, if you are on a budget, I would go for Roman because it is less expensive. Now, you can choose to reenact a Roman soldier both wearing lorica hamata, so the mail armor of the Romans, or lorica segmentata, although keep in mind that segmentata is not actually the term used by the Romans. We don't know how they called it. Segmentata is a Victorian term, and most likely they called it laminata, some people suggested, but we're not 100% sure. Well, you choose the one you like. Personally, I prefer segmentata, but a lot of people prefer mail. And again, if you don't have a lot of money, I would go for hamata, because for the same reasons that I said before. Hamata is more forgiving, you can pad it underneath. Here is the next question. Does segmentata need to be tailored to the body? Yes, it should. I mean, if you buy a segmentata armor from any site, really, whether it be Armour, whether it be even Battle Merchant, they will sell it off the shelf, including my own. I mean, the segmentata that I own is not tailored for my body. And in fact, eventually I do plan on getting one that is tailored to me, because if you look at the actual sort of girth hoops, these bands that form the segments of metal that form the segmentata, the way the Romans mass-produced them was that they needed to mass-produce them, but at the same time they didn't want to have them completely off the shelf because it needed to fit the soldier for the reasons that I will explain in a minute. So what they did is that they would mass-produce these segments of many different sizes, so that when the legionary would come to get his new recruit, the new recruit would come to get his Lorica segmentata that he paid for, or what happened is that the government was paying for in imperial times, and then he would give it back. I mean, well, you know the system, I think. If not, there are tons of videos about this on my channel. But what happens is that they would choose, they would go smaller and smaller with the actual segment so that it would fit properly and would reach your waist. The reason for this is that, again, when you wear your cingulum, so your military belt, and you do it tightly on your waist, it will push the segments and making sure that the weight will be distributed in between the shoulders and the hips. This, however, does not work with segmentata if it's too big, because it's plates. You can only apply a certain amount of pressure to them. And another important element to take into consideration is the fact that if you are reenacting the times of Caesar or the Republican times, then you should completely forget about segmentata, because that's an imperial armor. Go for hamata. But if you are reenacting imperial times, like I normally do, because that's my favorite time in the time frame of Roman history, then you can choose between the two, because armies and legions were mixed. You can have legionaries wearing hamata and legionaries wearing segmentata. Now, what goes underneath the armor is incredibly important in Roman reenactment, and we will get to this after a brief break, because it's hot today and I need to get myself something fresh to drink. But in the meantime, let me entertain you with a little bit of music. How about some Beethoven? Lovely jubbly, super malis or Thoracomachus. Please consider the super malis is not the actual historical term. The historical term is probably Thoracomachus. We do have some mentions in Rome with Roman writers, and super malis is what most people say in historical reenactment now, although the only historical usage of that term refers to a form of javelin, so probably not the term the Romans used. But anyways, what is a super malis? Is padding underneath the armor, so similar to the gambeson, similar to the aceton of medieval times. The super malis was worn underneath the armor but on top of the tunic, so it would provide a sort of in-between layer to help both protect your body, because from the metal of the armor it would ease the burden of the armor, but most importantly would also protect the tunic from the oil and grease that you would apply on your metal armor to prevent it from rusting. But super malis or Thoracomachus will be different depending on whether you're wearing segmentata or hamata. So let's take into consideration these differences. For hamata, it needed to be fully padded, with particular attention to the padding of your shoulders, and it should reach your mid-thighs. With segmentata instead, it can be shorter, it can reach your belt, or even a little bit, and it does not need to be padded, exception being the shoulders. The shoulders need to be heavily reinforced. When you pad your shoulders, you can do it with rabbit skin, you can do it with goat, you can even use heavy wool to pad it, or whatever you choose. At the end of the day, we don't have any archaeological remain. Well, there are some possible remains that some people say that could belong to a Thoracomatrus. Well, you know, it's organic, so of course we don't have much in terms of archaeological remains, so you can do it the way you want. I would suggest you to do it, you know, sleeveless. And again, the height of this padding of the shoulders should be at least 1.3 to 1.5 centimeters. Why? Because if it's the right height, what it's going to do, not only it's going to prevent, as I said, it's going to protect you from your shoulders from the weight of the shoulder plates, which is the heavier part of the armor in Lorica segmentata, but also it's going to protect your neck from chafing with contact with the plates, but most importantly it's going to align the plates, protecting your bosom properly. Because if you don't raise up the armor with this padding, what happens, and please notice this, is that the plates will be oblique, in sort of a diagonal, you know, pointing this way, 45 degrees almost. What this does, it applies pressure on the lever straps that are linking the upper part of the armor to the lower part of the armor, and with time this will basically break and damage the lever straps. Now, if you want to increase durability, if you put this proper height and distance from the shoulders with the actual lorica, the plates will be perfectly straight, as we see in iconography anyways, and this will place them properly and there will not be unnecessary pressure on the leather stripes. Okay, I have showered you with information. If you do have other questions, however, the sort of metal you should use, or whatever you want to discuss or want to know about entering this beautiful world of historical reenactment, please feel free to let me know in the comments below. Of course, one thing that is important is maintenance. Maintenance, maintenance. I mean, if you are entering reenactment, it's because you want to feel like a soldier or you want to feel like a knight. Well, you're not going to feel like them if you don't perform maintenance. Every Roman soldier at the end of the day of march would polish his armor, reapply oil if needed, and polish his weapons. Why? Because his life depended on the conditions, depended on the conditions of his equipment. So he had to make sure that it was in pristine conditions at all times. It was imperative. On the other hand, equally, a medieval knight would have to take care of his equipment, but since most knights were nobles, they wouldn't do it themselves. They would have a servant polish the armor for them. And you can do this if you want. I mean, if you're reenacting a knight, give 20 euros to your little cousin and make sure he oils everything up for you, and then you will have felt like a knight. But if your idea or intention is, I get the armor, I wear it, and then when I'm finished I just leave it in a corner and whatever happens to it, it happens, it's a shame. And to be honest, I wouldn't even enter reenactment, because maintenance is part of what a warrior in medieval times and classical times had to do. Alright, number ones, I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please remember thumbs up and subscribe to my channel for more content from the Metatron. Any request, let me know in the comments below. And remember that I will be seeing you tomorrow for my next daily upload. And remember, the Metatron has spread his wings. Valete!